Hi, I'm Nicole Ferraro, and this is The Divide, a podcast from Light Reading exploring the ongoing digital divide, why and where it still exists, and what needs to be done to get people everywhere connected to reliable, high-speed internet. My guests today are Samantha Schartman, Director of Philanthropic Programs at Connect Humanity, and Mark Colwell, Executive Director at Mission Telecom. Connect Humanity and Mission Telecom recently collaborated on the publication of the Alt Funding Field Guide, which introduces a new funding model for digital inclusion initiatives and explains how specific sectors, including telecommunications, can both implement and benefit from co-investing in sustaining this type of work. We get into the details of the funding model and how it works, why an alternative funding model is needed for digital inclusion efforts, and we discuss some specifics of how this can be applied in fields including telecom and workforce development. Samantha and Mark, welcome to the podcast. So great to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining me. We are going to be talking today about funding for digital inclusion work, and specifically a guide that your organizations collaborated on and recently released that outlines a new funding model for digital inclusion and why that's needed. But before we get to all of that, I want to give you each an opportunity to briefly introduce yourselves and reintroduce your organizations for anyone who's unfamiliar, although I know both Connect Humanity and Mission Telecom have been represented on this podcast before. But Samantha, let me come to you first. Feel free to introduce yourself and Connect Humanity for anyone who's unfamiliar.
Thanks so much for having us, Nicole. It was great to be here. My name is Samantha Schartman. I am the Director of Philanthropic Programs here at Connect Humanity. Connect Humanity is a nonprofit impact investor and an emerging CDFI organization. We are working to build the first loan fund purpose-built for digital infrastructure investment and digital inclusion. And the work that I do relates in such that we are looking to identify and capture the economic value created by digital adoption and engagement. And that's where we are today.
Excellent. And Mark, introduce yourself and Mission Telecom if you can.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nicole. It's great to be back. My name is Mark Colwell. I'm the Executive Director of Mission Telecom. We're a nonprofit wireless broadband provider, and we also have a grant-making program called Mission Telecom Giving. And we have a unique model where we're a spectrum license holder. We lease our spectrum to a subsidiary of T-Mobile, and as a result, we're able to offer low-cost and sometimes donated service to schools, libraries, and other nonprofits.
Excellent. So I'm really excited to get to talk with both of you today about this guide and about the importance of funding for digital inclusion and equity and adoption programs in general. We're going to get to the guide in a bit. I'm going to ease us in before we get there. But just to set the stage a little bit, I would love to hear from each of you on what we even mean when we're talking about digital adoption and inclusion programs, why funding for those programs matter, and what the barriers have been to sustaining existing funding piles, whether we're talking about on the federal end or even corporate philanthropy. Mark, given your position in the nonprofit space, let me come to you first to speak to that a little bit. And then Samantha, I'd love for you to add your thoughts.
Absolutely. Well, so I've been working on digital equity for almost my entire career. I started working in Congress and I spent 8 years, 3 in the House, 5 in the Senate on this topic. And at that time, this would have been the late aughts and the early teens. It was really an access issue. We were trying to get connections to all the homes that were viable. And as the bandwidth demands increased, we had a higher and higher threshold by which we wanted to get those connections. And there still are millions of homes without connections, but by and large, the CPF and B program are closing that gap. There's new technologies like satellite that are helping to serve places that are really hard to get to with wires or even with fixed wireless access. So the access part of this challenge is slowly being closed. We're now in the mid 90% in terms of providing a viable connection. And that will continue to close over the next few years. And so the focus now becomes on why don't people subscribe when they have access? And there's a number of studies that have been done over time. And it really comes down to things like the cost of subscription, right? Starlink may be available to many, many places, but some people can't afford $90 a month or $120 as it is in some places. Other people don't have devices that can get on the internet, so they don't have a need for internet in their household, or they don't have the skills, right? They don't know how to use a computer, so they don't buy one. And so we now are focusing more of our attention on, if we can get a connection, and we have a connection in many places, how do we get more people to adopt it and use it? Because that's where the benefits to society incur.
All right. Thank you so much, Samantha.
Yeah, 92% of jobs now need digital skills. That was 45% less in 2002. So we've really come a long way with the need for this work. And unfortunately, to Mark's point, there's many that do not have the skills to meaningfully use things. And so even if someone might have minor access, the acceleration and pace of technology development with the rise of AI is going at such a pace that we are really risking leaving quite a lot of people behind, even if they're on the lower end of the I still can use it spectrum. So, we really need to think about how we're bringing along the citizens that are going to be impacted by technology and make sure that everyone has the access and skills and community support, really, to meaningfully use these things to enhance their lives and the lives of their local ecosystems.
Yeah. And, we're going to get to the guide itself in a moment and actually talk about the solutions you guys present. But just thinking about the last few years, we saw the Digital Equity Act get canceled before it could be implemented. Now it's half back because the court agreed to reinstate one of the programs, though we need to wait for NTIA to issue guidance before everybody can reapply for those grants. The Affordable Connectivity Program kicked, 24 million households off because Congress couldn't come up with a way to refund it. The BEAD non-deployment funds remain in a state of shrug emoji because the NTIA keeps delaying when it's going to release the guidance on what it calls 21 billion in savings, which is not savings because it's supposed to fund these kind of initiatives that you're talking about. Obviously, the political landscape it lends itself to some inconsistencies in terms of the funding because it can be pulled back before it's even implemented because of how long stuff like this takes to come together. But what is that? I'm curious for, any first of all, any reflections on the Digital Equity Act sort of coming back to life if you're optimistic about that? But also, have you seen the impact on this sort of like pulling back and promising of resources that then get taken away on the actual communities that need these, digital adoption services? Samantha, I'll come to you first, and then Mark, feel free to add your thoughts.
Mark has some insider knowledge with his Congress, Washington.
Yes, that's true. Mark, you do know better.
I think many of us in the field are hopefully optimistic. We are being cautious about that. Obviously, it's a day by day thing. But even if it does come back, right? First of all, I don't think it'll be a fast process. It's going to take, years probably to really get that funding back out to the programs and organizations that should have it on behalf of their states. And so that there's that problem that it's not going to be a fast solution. And then it's not a forever solution. And this has been the case with federal funding from the get-go. And it's really the impetus for the alt funding working group and the guide, right? Both Mark and I, were around to see in the early 2000s, the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, which was one of the first major investments of the federal government in adoption work. And that work really stood up. I feel like it stood up a good part of what is the modern, our current contemporary digital equity field. We created jobs, we created new organizations, we did extremely good work. Many of us, have stories galore to tell, and we know that it was impactful. But at the end of that program, there was not a plan for sustaining that work. And so there was a cliff. And myself, many of my colleagues, I use the informal, unscientific ratio of around 80% of our field just kind of evaporated in the year or so that followed BTOP. And that was because of a lack of funding, right? We did not have a sustainability plan. And so we have to get out of this process where we continually, do this boom or bust problem, because we cannot afford to lose our community technology uh, infrastructure, right? This is now critical infrastructure for the modern age. And if it's going to continually be at risk because of political wins or, various grant cycles, it's going to hold not only individuals back, but our entire economy.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Mark?
As you listed off the premise of the question, I was smirking because this was the exact conversation Sam and I had a year ago. It was 2 weeks after the infamous Truth Social post from President Trump, essentially eliminating the Digital Equity Act. And we sat around the table. We'd come out of we were at the Net Inclusion Conference. So we were talking to a lot of digital equity folks, and we'd come out of some sessions, and we kind of, rhetorically asked each other, like, how do we sustain this work long term? We can't live and die by laws passed by Congress, court cases, and the back and forth of the political system. And so that was kind of actually the origin of the idea behind the alt funding guide. But I think as we sit now, almost 2 years later, at least a year and a half later, I think the development with the court case is positive. While it did eliminate one of the covered population categories, I think in talking with a lot of the digital equity folks, if we were to do a Venn diagram, there's a lot of folks who show up in multiple categories. And I think by and large, the community's viewing it positively, as if the court case continues and ends up in the position where the money's reinstated, we'll be in good shape. And I think that there will still be a lot of good that can come, even if certain, the one category was eliminated, for example. So that's good. But really, to Sam's point, it's kind of a down payment, an initial investment to get some of this work going. There has to be a longer term sustainable model here. And I think it is advantageous and can be even politically palatable if we can explain it properly to folks, because when I was in Congress, for example, we worked on an IT reform bill. And one of the reasons we were interested in that is when you have part of society living in the analog world, you have to have all the things that come with analog. You have to have people printing forms, filling out forms, sending forms, opening forms, typing forms into a computer. If you could teach people just to do the online form, there's a major efficiency for society, both for businesses, for government, and so on and so forth. So there's some really positive benefits. I think it's more about explaining and storytelling. And I think that the field guide, which I know we'll talk about, really does kind of lay out the models that should be appealing to all of America for why this is important to invest in.
Absolutely. So that's a perfect moment to actually talk about the guide instead of teasing the guide for another 20 minutes. So let's talk about the alt funding field guide that you all worked on together, published recently. Obviously, you just talked about kind of how it came about, but specifically, what is it? What is this? And how does the new financial model in the guide work and differ from existing models of funding digital inclusion initiatives? And then we'll get to some of the specifics from the sectors that you guys get into. But Mark, do you want to speak to that first, or Samantha? Either one.
Sam is really the hard work of this. Ultimately, this idea came about. I had brought it up with our Mission Telecom Giving Executive Director, Cindy Maxton, and introduced her and Sam, and it was ultimately funded. That was kind of our role in it, but it was a desire to think differently about the problem. And then Sam, I think, did an excellent job of bringing a lot of the really expert people. The great thing about digital equity work is it's been so academic based for so long that there's tons of evidence out there. We just no one had really pieced it together and explained the story. And so that's our piece of it. And Sam, you can probably explain better exactly the guide itself and what does it bring new to the table.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. I think Mark's being a little humble. One of his contributions in that early conversation was, wouldn't it be great if we had a guide? But what we ended up with is not just a guide. It's actually a collection of 7 chapters. We have 6 sectors covered, each in a pretty in-depth chapter. These are like 20 to 40 page, chapters. They're kind of hefty. We have healthcare, workforce, housing, local government, telecommunications, and education are our 6. And then we have a framework chapter and a foreword by Blair Levin. And so that's what the guide is. It is that collection of writing pieces. We also have 2-page executive summaries for each of the sector chapters because we know that they are long and hefty and in-depth. Not everyone has time to do all of that investment in reading. So that is what the guide is. Ultimately, each of the chapters goes through what is the economic value proposition to each sector, healthcare, workforce, et cetera, in supporting and co-investing in programs that drive digital adoption and use of adjacent technologies. So it's like if a program were to train someone on how to use a telehealth portal or platform, et cetera, what economic benefit does the hospital system, the managed care providers, the insurance company derive from that activity? How do you identify where those savings accrue? And can we capture some of those to reinvest in the programs that continue to drive those savings? That's the idea. So when we talk about our framework and why is it different from other things, it's sort of flipping the script on traditional grant work. And so, whereas, traditional grant work, there might be a call for proposals around a certain program area, or, we want to address X, Y, or Z thing. Who will raise their hand to do it? We submit, and, the rest is history. This is a little different because what we're saying to our organizations is you are doing good work, you are producing economic value. Who's benefiting from that? And if you can say that you're producing value, can you go in, walk into a room and say, hey, will you co-invest in if I can continue to, or even increase the delivery of these benefits to you? It's a much more business-minded framing. We're not saying that people wouldn't use grants as a mechanism for moving money between organizations, but we are talking about the change in framing from being a charitable contribution to a business investment.
Mm-hmm. And the idea would be to generate revenue from the actual initiatives that the organizations are funding.
Or cost savings, cost diversions. I think the ROI can come in a few different forms that are all meaningful to various stakeholders. And that stuff is covered really in depth in our chapters.
Yeah, and I want to get to the specifics of a couple of those chapters, but I was wondering if the model is modeled on anything in particular, and also why those 6 sectors.
This is the place where I need to channel our Chief Investment Officer, Brian, and CEO, Brian.
Channeling Brian.
Yes, calling Brian. What he has helped do the initial framework and helped us to talk about it. It's very much borrowing from impact investing language and the creation of capital stacks and how deals are created for impact investments. So we are really borrowing on that framework. It's not a perfect one-to-one, but as a metaphor and a general guide, it's helpful to understand how you can foreground the community or program need before looking for sources of funding. So that's kind of where that comes from. I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Oh, the other part was the why those 6 sectors in
Why
particular.
those? Because that's where we have demonstrated a lot of cross-sector collaboration already. Um, there's more to be done. It's somewhat of an arbitrary selection, but also just common stakeholders at digital inclusion tables.
Totally. So I want to talk about what this co-investment model would look like in a couple of the different sectors. And I will say, even though it is long, it is very well written, a great guide, a great read. Highly recommend reading all of the pages. But since this podcast runs on Light Reading, which is a telecommunications publication, I'd love to start there in terms of what this model looks like in telecom, according to the guide. Mark, I know that you had a big hand in that, and obviously Mission Telecom is heavily involved in that space, of course. So can you speak to what the guide tells us about telecommunications?
Yeah, I think generally from a telecom perspective, the capital investment is made by telecom, but the adoption rate is lacking in certain neighborhoods and certain areas. And so there's an extreme benefit to telecom if you can get people interested in broadband. And if they own a computer, know how to use a computer, have a smart TV, or any of the other connected devices, they're going to have a stronger incentive to want to sign up for broadband. And that's going to be a revenue generation model for providers that offer that service. In our specific model at Mission Telecom, ours is a little different because we are a Spectrum license holder, as I mentioned, and we lease Spectrum to T-Mobile, a subsidiary of T-Mobile, I should say, and we receive access to the network at very low cost. And so we have a number of digital equity partners who are resellers of our service because their model is to provide a full package of skills training with device, with internet, right? And we play the internet piece of that. And that's a full package that's going to get someone to use the computer, know how to use it, know where to get support. And that's a benefit. And then, they're able to place this line with a family that's in need as part of their program. And we're offering such low rates that they can have margin on top of that, which can help sustain their program. So that's just one model. But I think all those models in the telecom sector are around encouraging stronger adoption. And there are certain groups in America with very low adoption rates. It might not surprise you, but low-income households, for example, are in the 50s, the mid-50s in terms of adoption. They just generally can't afford it or can't afford devices that go on the network. One of the interesting areas in telecom is also the percentage of mobile-only homes, mobile-only. And I like to use the example of the person who works in a downtown but lives in a suburb where it's more affordable and uses public transit. So they're not at home a lot during the day. They have less of a need for a home internet connection because they're not there, but they do have a mobile need, right? They're on a bus for 45 minutes or an hour each way to and from work. And so we have to be flexible in finding all the places where people are using the internet and not be too wedded to any one model. But in all of them, it's about adoption and usage. The more you can get someone interested in the product and know how to use the product, they're going to want it more. So that's the model there for telecom.
Samantha, did you want to add anything about the telecom chapter?
Only to say that, it's even if in those that are maybe minor adopters, meaningful usage, training can help people find new ways of providing self-value. One of the things that I know my program did during the BTOP years is we had to teach people, in order to justify the payment and afford the internet subscription, we had to show them how to offset other pieces of their home budget. And so whether that was paying bills online so they didn't have to buy stamps, or, small things like that, clipping coupons online, printing those out, comparison shopping so that they're not, buying at the highest price all the time. All of those things may seem really common and almost we don't think about them if you are a avid adopter. But for someone who's very new to that, they're not realizing that those things kind of add up and then can actually cover the cost of a low cost, affordable plan, even amongst fairly low income families.
That's definitely true in the telecom sector. If you think about rural areas, and I worked at Dish Network for 1 year, and we serve a lot of rural homes, but a lot of those folks, they didn't have a viable broadband option, so they're paying a dial-up internet bill, which is probably the same or close to the same price as an urban dweller with a very good cable plan. They're paying for satellite TV and TV programming, which is continually escalating every year. And then telephone service on top of that. And you bundle that all together, that's pretty expensive. You move those services to broadband, you move to streaming, you move to a free library card where you don't have to go to the library to check out the book. And it starts to be real savings for families who, right now in this economy are struggling with the ever increasing cost of survival.
Yeah, absolutely. If we can just briefly get into one of the other sectors that you guys covered, and then I'll everyone can read the rest on their own. But workforce development, I think, is also particularly relevant to our audience. So how does the co-investment model apply there? Samantha, maybe I'll come to you first on that one.
Sure. There's a couple of different ways that co-investment can work in workforce. Our workforce, as we noted, you can't even apply to a job at Walmart today without having digital skills, because that application is online. So you better know how to fill it out. So really everybody needs a basic level of literacy or better. I usually say or better. So it's in employers' best interests to be supporting the work that provides them a pipeline of employees. So that's number one. Just at the basic level, we need to create the entry point and on-ramp for employment in many places, and employers should care about that. On even the higher end, like where you're thinking of like maybe more advanced skills, not necessarily just entry work, right? You also need these things, right? First of all, you need outreach to your workforce. You need people to be able to be reskilled, upskilled, and you need to have all of that access skills to be able to do that as well. And so, there's a lot of things that are necessary, like factory work is being automated. So people that have even held these jobs for decades are now having to learn digital skills when they never had to before because of the retrofitting of different mechanics going on. So there's a lot of that. Workforce agencies also, they're mandated to help people find work, right? And in order to meet their mandate and metrics, they really have to connect with the people that digital inclusion community technology programs work with all the time. So first of all, there's like a natural just referral network here that should be exploited, because I don't know about your local agencies, but I've spoken to many of mine in my area, and they have trouble finding people to fit a lot of the job roles that they have posted. And so that's a natural area of collaboration where they have funding to support that. So the co-investment in creating that job pipeline is a natural collaboration point. Also, many people now under WIOHA, and I want to caveat this because WIOHA which is WIOA. I'm kind of saying it as a word, but it's actually an acronym. It's not been recertified, or so we don't know what the future of that is, but that's traditionally the main funding mechanism for workforce development agencies. So under that funding mandate, the agencies, if they meet a certain threshold of people getting into jobs and then having job improvements within 6 months of working with the agency, they can actually unlock discretionary funding from the governor of their state, which means they get more money to do more good work and more people benefit. So there's an aligned interest that if a community technology program can help build their pipeline, help connect the people with the skills they need, train them, get them into those job roles, then that agency is able to unlock additional funding. They should be able to co-invest in sustaining that work and momentum.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Mark, before I give you the last question and set you all free?
I would just say that it's a huge compliment to Sam and the great work that Blair Levin, who authored the original
Yeah.
National Broadband Plan back in 2009, offered a forward. And it's kind of cool to see those worlds connect. And he has some great commentary on the workforce piece that I recommend everyone check out.
For sure. We love Blair around here. Everyone does, I think, in the world. Okay, so last question for you guys then. If somebody reading this guide wants to get in touch, do you recommend reaching out for any further advice on implementing some of these suggestions? And moreover, what is the cost of not finding a sustainable solution here to funding digital inclusion work? Mark, I'll start with you and then close us out with Samantha.
Well, the second question first. I mean, the cost of dealing with everything downstream instead of upstream is it just costs more. It's the analog part of government, the analog part of business has to stay around longer, and it's very expensive to run that. And so I think that's the real answer there. There's a major incentive if you can move upstream and solve the problem. It'll pay dividends as Sam's report shows. And then in terms of getting in touch, I mean, one of the groups that Sam and I both are involved with is the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. And they're constantly looking for stories and ways to talk locally or nationally about the great work that this is, that the folks that are practitioners in the space are doing. I'd recommend looking at them. And then in terms of us personally, I mean, missiontelecom.org is our website. You can certainly reach out. We're happy to engage. And then I'd turn over to Sam for any of the connecting with her folks.
Anyone is welcome to reach out to us at connecthumanity.fund. I am just Samantha at connecthumanity.fund. Happy to put that out there. You can reach out to us. We are building a case study repository right now. With the intent to highlight and elevate people that are doing this kind of good, innovative, cross-sector collaboration work. I want to know about it. So if this is sounding like something that you're involved in, I'd love to hear from you. Yeah.
Awesome.
Please reach out.
Okay, thank you both so much for this. Also, I'm very excited to hear about that repository because I want to read those case studies as well and report on them. So thank you both for taking the time. Thanks for putting out this guide. And I look forward to catching up in, a year or so when everybody has implemented these recommendations and the world is just funding digital inclusion nonstop. Yes, Samantha, I see.
I also didn't want to say a real thank you to Mark and Mission Telecom Giving, both sides of the house, on their support of this, because it wouldn't have happened without their support. And I just want to make sure that gets in.
Perfect. Well,
I'll to say thank you to Nicole for covering the topic and your great work.
The thanks for everyone. The thanks are all around. And thank you for listening. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you again, Samantha and Mark, for joining me. Thank you as well to Pierre Landriau for editing this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Light Reading Podcast for more episodes of The Divide, as well as interviews and insights from the Light Reading team. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.